Shiva, okay? Bow down and worship me.
Speaking from the heart here, I'm not ashamed to admit that I really like the 2007 Halloween remake. It's not without flaws, obviously, the generic skanky slasher fodder being amped up to annoying levels in the case of Linda and Judith Myers, and the grisly tone being pushed overboard on occasion, like the two hicks trying to molest a patient at the hospital. But on the whole, I think Rob Zombie succeeded where a lot of other horror remakes fail by making the movie his own, while the latter parts of the film are structured very much after the 1978 original. The first half adds a lot of depth and, dare I say, is the best part of the movie, in which it gives shape to the second and third acts, ultimately concluding in a pretty good movie overall in my opinion. However, a common point of criticism for the two zombie remakes is that by exploring what makes Michael Myers tick, it ends up making him less scary, ruining the pure evil mystique by pinning it all down to him coming from a broken home and being abused as a kid. And to those specific critiques, I like to raise a little point of contention that I like to call content over context. It's a dichotomy I see a lot from fan culture, where oftentimes something like a remake or a reimagining is given a lot of judgment based purely on the external factors, rather than the reasoning behind the changes made to pre-existing works. And in this case, I think a lot of the criticism, at least towards the first Halloween remake, is a tad unwarranted. Especially after rewatching it in preparation for this review and getting a good look as to why this direction worked best insofar as retelling the origins of Michael Myers, and it all boils down to the fact that the focus was flipped from the nature to nurture aspect in how Michael Myers became who he is, and the way in which he slowly degrades over the course of the film's running time into this soulless void of destruction. The movie made great use of its earlier running time, and it really paid off in spades, making Michael the monster he gradually grew into as an adult, scraping together the tattered remains of his past. But of course, a lot of fans tend to disregard this and basically just slag it as being like a pseudo-Jason Voorhees ripoff. Again, content over context. Don't get it twisted, there is a lot that you can critique from the 2007 Halloween remake, but the origin of Michael Myers is far from the worst part of the movie. And the alternative is having yet another derivative movie retconning all the movies except the first one, because paying audiences didn't like the one about the Irish people and silly TV advertisements that killed people. Shut up. Which brings us to today's subject, 2009's Halloween 2. Without wanting to waste too much time on development history, there is one thing that some might see as a warning sign in what happens when a creative force gets too much creative control. You see, Rob Zombie considered the first Halloween remake to be an exhaustive process, and had reservations about coming back for a sequel, until he had a year to cool down and was given complete creative control by Malik Akkad to make this sequel completely his own. No need to adhere to the structure or trappings of John Carpenter, with Malik's mission statement basically being to move away from established formulas. Now, usually whenever a creative visionary is given the sort of freedom granted here, it can go any number of which ways in terms of quality. But even in the event of failure, it does often lend itself to some very interesting mess kind of ideas, see also Batman Returns, Death Stranding, and to a certain extent the Star Wars prequels. And suffice it to say, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 was also a movie that falls into this category, but you know, rough with the smooth, so let's take a walk around the spirit world and go on a journey. So the plot kicks off with... huh? The drive of physical body is to release powerful emotional forces like rage and destruction. Oh. Well, ladies and gentle ladies, buckle your seatbelts, dudes and dudettes, because we're about to... So we cut back to the 1970s, where Deborah Myers is paying a visit to her budding serial killer son, Michael, gifting him a white horse as a present. And as luck would have it, Michael coincidentally had a dream about a white horse with his mother dressed in white ready to take him home. As you can see, this movie is absolutely delighted to lay down some painfully trite levels of... but it also presents a psychological, supernatural element to the mythos that would be interesting and cool to see in a completely different movie. But the devil is in the details, and we've barely just begun. Jumping back to the present day, we're right back at the tail end of the first one, where Officer Brad Dourif tracks down Laurie Strode, wandering aimlessly through the streets, still manic after having shot Michael Myers in the head, and adrenaline giving way to an emotional breakdown.
It's okay. It's alright. It's alright. It's alright. Why don't you come with me, okay?
Jesus Christ! Okay, pro tip for aspiring filmmakers and horror people in general. If you're going for an overwhelming atmosphere that pounds the viewer into submission, you need to make sure that you build up an appropriate atmosphere first and foremost. Again, I'm not the kind of guy who thinks that jump scares are the devil's work unlike a lot of horror veterans, but as I alluded to in the Silent Hill 3 review, when you try and psych out the viewer with loud noises, unless the viewers are squeamish or easily upset, scenes like this are more annoying and grating to watch rather than frightening. And the saddest thing is that in terms of scares and how the scene is structured, the setup of this is actually pretty good. The whole idea of being strapped down to a hospital table, completely delirious and overwhelmed by the sight of sterile doctors cleaning your wounds while you leak blood and bile profusely, it's a very unsettling concept, but it needs to be done with a degree of build-up before the big crescendo that is the loud noises. I guess one might call us starting the movie off with a bang, but arguably, I think the slower build-up would have benefited the movie tenfold. Anyway, with Michael loaded up into an ambulance on his way to the morgue, we fulfill our quota of creepy rednecks discussing the fine, fair philosophy of how one might spend a romantic evening among the dearly departed in more, intimate circumstances.
What's the difference between jam and jelly?
I don't know. What?
You can't jelly your cock up a dead girl's ass.
Why won't ladies talk to me? Actually, hang on, isn't that Portman from Doom? I guess he's just genetically predisposed to play sex-deprived necrophiliacs.
Like, cow! Cow! Fuck.
Far be it from me to question our lusty necrophiliac here, but I think I'd have a bit more of a visceral reaction to being in a car crash than...
Fuck.
Well, not that it really matters, because Michael rises from the dead to finish off what St. Angus the Cow had started. Oh god, I'm tripping balls! Meanwhile, Laurie awakens in the Dead Quiet Hospital, wheeling her way towards her best friend to ask, Annie, you okay? You okay? You okay, Annie? And before anybody brings it up, as per Skully's fun fact of the week, yes, Annie is indeed played by Danielle Harris, who played Jamie Lloyd in the 2 forgettable Halloween sequels, and of course the 6th Halloween sequel, which was absolutely batshit insane. But alas, Laurie's hauled away by one of the orderlies who just ends up abandoning her? Yeah, don't bother helping the sick, broken, beaten trauma patient back to her room. Sure, she'll be fine. Not that it really matters, because the nurse returns moments later with a very delayed reaction to getting stabbed. So that means that she would have had to have seen Michael, get stabbed, acknowledge that he was there, and then walk away as if nothing happened? What the hell? Just because you're going for a supernatural horror tone, it doesn't mean that the laws of physics can turn Looney Tunes whenever you want. So, shock of all shocks, Michael decided to pay his dear sister Boo a visit in the hospital, while she hobbles away to the safe arms of fake Wilford Brimley here. But while fake Wilford Brimley can take on the Thing no problem, he doesn't exactly fare well against the power of Michael Myers. So, Laurie's about to meet her demise and... Okay, I have more than a few questions. Number 1, does that mean the whole stuff about the nurses, the coroners, and fake Wilford Brimley was all in Laurie's head? And number B, if that was what actually happened, then how did Laurie escape from Michael in that scene? And lastly, while the previous segment was pretty well shot and edited for the most part, it was 25 minutes of a 2-hour movie that could have easily been left on the cutting room floor and nothing of value would have been lost. Which is really a damn shame, since the first one, regardless of what you might think about it fleshing the backstory of Michael Myers out, used the first half of its runtime very effectively. But here in Halloween 2, you have an opening scene filled with nothing but loud noises. and a bunch of inconsequential character deaths that mean nothing to the plot as a whole. So in the intervening 2 years since Laurie's encounter with Michael Myers, she's developed more issues than a gossip magazine, an awesome taste in music, and now lives with the Brad Dourif family.
Want some egg whites?
No. I think I'm gonna get me one of them sticky buns on the way in.
Ew. That's gotta be the second most creepiest thing I've ever heard Brad Dourif say next to,
I have a date with a 6-year-old boy.
but all the same, I never want to think about Brad Dourif's sticky buns for the rest of my life.
Sticky buns, sticky buns, sticky buns, sticky buns.
Well, regardless of such, despite the budding friendship of Laurie and Annie, mental stresses and attempts to reach out to her start to strain their bond a little bit.
One day at a time, babe.
One day at a time. One fucking day at a time. You know what, if I hear that fucking phrase one more fucking time, I mean, she just fucking sits there in her fucking leather chair and judges me like she's fucking God.
It's her job, Laurie.
I mean, I don't know why she's getting pissed considering that in the first one, Annie suffered just as much, if not more so than Laurie ever did in the first movie. I'll admit, I wasn't the biggest fan of remake Laurie in the 2007 movie, but I do think that she was adapted well enough in the whole how would a modern day teenager survive against Michael Myers kind of thing. And what they decide to do with Laurie here, having her visit her therapist, Lois Lane, and suffering mental breakdowns as the events begin to weigh heavily upon her, is, I think, legitimately good character progression, and sets up an interesting way to deal with what a survivor would do in the aftermath of being attacked by someone like Michael Myers. But of course, herein lies the problem. I do know from experience that people tend to become very, volatile and spiteful towards others, even if it is completely unintentional. And it's a very tricky thing to keep the audience on Laurie's side when she's spitting venom towards people like Annie or her therapist, who are just trying to help her. And keep in mind, a good slasher movie lives and dies by the likability of its cast, because otherwise they're just grist for the mill. And if it all just boils down to death scenes, then you're gonna lose out on a lot of tension and build up from the threat of your antagonist, since you're just waiting for them to disembowel the annoying characters. And I'm not gonna say that Rob Zombie totally strikes out with what he wanted to do with Laurie here, but especially with the upcoming plot points, it needs a lot of work put into it. That being said, Laurie's therapist isn't exactly helping matters since she reveals that indeed, Michael is still alive. You know, something that I'm sure Laurie is really wanting to hear on the day that she was attacked by a malevolent force of evil.
So what do you see?
White horse?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't Rorschach tests an outdated bit of psychology testing? I mean, I'm not trying to make a joke here or anything, I'm legitimately curious if they're still used in professional studies. Well, that was utterly scintillating, so let's dump our excess brain cells with some more stupidity with the return of Dr. Loomis, played by Malcolm McDowell. Also, this is obligatory.
No, look, it's the wrong photograph! I mean, this is old Loomis. This is new.
So, dudes and dudettes, meet the new Dr. Loomis, a sellout pseudopsychology author dude who's releasing a new book about Michael Myers, and has completely pissed away his credibility into the wind for the sake of living the sweet life. Oh yeah. And if that wasn't enough to put a smile on your dial, he's also a raging douche.
You are quite an odd one, aren't you? I mean, look at you. Are you color coordinated? What pink clogs and this orange thing? Are you a clam digger or something?
And while I do think a lot of the newer elements included for the movie can be made to work with a bit of a rewrite, the same can't necessarily be said for Dr. Loomis. And this wasn't any sort of mistake either. Rob Zombie intended for Loomis this time around to be an exaggerated parody on psychologists who exploit the pains and sufferings of their victims and family members to get a little bit of that sweet. But what continues to chive my spuds is the fact that it feels completely antithetical of Loomis's position in the first movie, where he very clearly did care a lot about Michael, and was the only one really taking the situation all that seriously. A lot of this is held by the fact that you saw scenes of Loomis examining Michael over the years as he slowly degraded into a shell of himself, and the performance of Malcolm McDowell in those scenes was excellent.
I really don't know what else to say, Michael. I mean, you haven't said a word for 15 years. That's nearly twice as long as my first marriage. Wow. It's strange, Michael. In a weird way, you've become like my best friend.
The only thing that ever came close to Loomis being in any way associated with how he is in this movie is maybe one line in the first movie.
The doctor involved. I think he wrote a book or something. Fucking blood money.
Yeah, I read that book. It was a masterpiece. Now, are we close?
But given the sarcastic delivery, I don't think that was ever the intention for Loomis to become this. I mean, hell, if you really wanted to parody sensationalist psychologist authors, you probably could have mentioned, like, a retcon doctor who saw Michael in the first movie, tried to get a scoop out of him before being kicked out, and is now cashing in on the fame now that Dr. Loomis was dead. That being said, though, it does lead to by far the greatest line in filmmaking history.
Do you think Michael's alive or dead?
Look, let me make things nice and sparkling clear. Michael Myers is fucking dead. Now, do you brain-dead gossip mongers want me to spell that out for you? D-E-A-D!
Bravo, chaps. Meanwhile, Michael finds a new place to live and is contacted by Deborah's spirit, who commands Michael to bring them home this Halloween. And with that pin drop, I think we all know where this is headed. Even though where this is headed is a very ill-thought-out direction. And after deciding to kill Flash from Batman Begins, Michael decides to tuck into tonight's dinner while Laurie does likewise. Because as we all know, no Halloween night is complete without La Pizza. But it seems as though Laurie's taste buds are out of whack, since it's in this very scene where the psychic link between Michael Myers and Laurie Strode begins to grow a little stronger. As you could probably tell, I have a lot to say about this, but before we continue on, I do have one question. If Laurie's tasting the dead dog, then by circumstance of the trade-off, is Michael tasting the pizza? Huh, good trade-off. However, before we tackle the supernatural element, let's tackle some of the small fry problems the following scenes have. The first of which being the visual direction for these trippy scenes right here. Don't get it twisted, what I'm about to say isn't necessarily negative, but there is a bit of a caveat that comes with its specific style, for the lack of a better phrase. Insofar as the production design, cinematography, and presentation, it all looks good and very up to snuff in creating a very unique visual aesthetic, right from the mind of El Super Beasto. But therein lies the problem in that the set design and presentation looks better set for a music video than it does for a movie that's as gritty and grounded as Rob Zombie's Halloween movies. The fact that it looks very stagey is nice, don't get me wrong, but feels a little bit ill-appropriate since it makes the hallucinations in Spirit World look very tangible, for the lack of a better phrase. The point I'm trying to make is that it wouldn't be so bad if it didn't clash with the more grounded reality of the earlier movie, and even parts of this movie in terms of its very grungy and lived-in visual design. Whereas the Alice in Wonderland look we're seeing right here can't help but feel a little bit tacky as a result. Which is part of the reason why I said earlier that this melding between the dreamscape and reality would be really cool for a completely different Halloween movie. Because it feels more like Michael and Deborah are about to meet Metallica on the set of the Until It Sleeps music video, or that Rob Zombie himself is about to show up singing What Rob Zombie is presenting here is interesting, and insofar as visuals and concepts go, I think he was onto a winner here. But the biggest problem here is the setup and grounding for these supernatural elements to take place. Retconning in the white horse metaphor and attempting to put it in places where it makes no sense within the first movie's more grounded setting just isn't enough. Doubly so when you attempt to reintroduce the idea that Michael Myers and the Myers family lineage possess these weird spiritual powers that in this continuity they showed no signs of having before. I will say that it is handled better here than it was in Halloween 6, but regardless, this is the main crux of the movie, and a lot of it collapses because of this. I mean, of course, it isn't helped by having scenes wasted on Dr. Loomis being a prick with such pointless filler like this.
Well, I think it's a mistake.
Oh, yeah, you do you?
Yes.
Well, when I want your opinion, I'll beat it out of you. Here, now take that and go sit in the car. Go on, get your ass in there.
That being said, however, there are a lot of scenes that do genuinely feel like a solid continuation of where the previous movie left off, particularly with Laurie slowly coming undone from the trauma she suffered and demanding more drugs to take the pain away, or hallucinating a reenactment of Michael Myers killing his family in the first movie, only with Brad Dourif and Annie in place of Michael's family. And while it's not handled with as much care as I would have liked, these are some of the strongest scenes in the movie, and had they stayed the psychological course of Laurie slowly putting the pieces together about her past and dealing with these hallucinations, we would be talking about a much more interesting movie about Laurie's fall from grace. And speaking of which, massive props to Scout Taylor Compton, because she goes above and beyond in selling the trauma that Laurie's suffering through these scenes in particular that really goes to show the fragments of an interesting movie trying to breathe life into itself. Although, speaking of scenes that remind me of music videos, moving swiftly along, Michael shows up at an all-too-familiar strip club, and suddenly Deborah appears to him on the stage, and, I think this clip says what we're all thinking.
Freud would certainly have a field day with that little one, wouldn't he?
Although this does bring up a little bit of a character flaw in Deborah Myers, since in the first movie she was repulsed to the point of suicide when Michael went kill crazy over normal people, and yet now when Michael is murdering people left, right, and center, she seems pretty cool with it for some reason. I mean, her ultimate goal is to have her family reunited in the spirit world, which means the deaths of Michael and Laurie, but the means in which to achieve it just seems very vague and not really well defined at all.
Only a river of blood can bring us back together.
So what does killing a bunch of random people accomplish? Is the White Horse responsible for this? I have no idea, and to be perfectly honest, I don't think the movie really has any idea either. On to more interesting matters, we get to the scene where Laurie discovers her origin after seeing Dr. Loomis's tell-all book about Michael Myers, and even Michael Myers himself takes umbrage with Loomis exploiting his life story. And you know, I wouldn't be so dour about Loomis's subplot if it actually went anywhere, but besides telling Laurie about her origins, something that could have easily have been dealt with via Brad Dourif telling her, it just feels like meaningless comic relief. Anyway, Laurie, having come to realize that Brad Dourif knew the truth about her past the whole time, takes off to the sounds of Diamond Head, while an officer is sent down to watch over Annie. And then we see Weird Al Yankovic? What the hell?
I'm a little confused. Are we talking about the Austin Powers Mike Myers, or is this...
It's over.
And speaking of cameos, it's time to welcome a very special guest, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, because he's literally been in fucking everything these days, I present to you, live over the phone, Mr. Corey Taylor!
Fuck off! I'm so fucking pissed at you! Fuck you, you little fucking bitch!
Are you a giant? Can we be friends?
Oh, you silly little boy. The appropriate reaction you should have to this gargantuan beast is...
Holy smokes! You need booze!
So we then cut to a Halloween party, which reminds me of a very repetitive and overlong scene in a future Halloween movie, but I will say this much, at least this one has some trippy visuals that work quite nicely given the club setting, even if it does slightly remind me of similar scenes done in The Unborn, released the exact same year. But once again, I have to call attention to the psychic link between Michael and Laurie, and the biggest reason why the movie falls flat as a result. Again, use the supernatural White Horse metaphor if you must, but the fact remains that even despite knowing what she knows, Laurie Strode has absolutely no memory of anything that happened back when Michael's initial murders started. She was an infant during that whole thing, so she should logically have no idea who Michael is, no idea who Deborah is, and when it's all said and done, this supernatural connection just feels forced and tenuous more than anything else. I mean, I found it contrived in the original Halloween 2 when the sibling connection was revealed, but with the supernatural elements here, you know, something like this could be made to work, but it just needed a solid foundation laid out for it, and unfortunately, well, we didn't really get one provided for us. In the meantime, one of Brad Dourif's cop buddies is off doing his rounds until... Begging thy pardons, good sir, but what the fuck was that? No, seriously, what the fuck was that? The dude was just standing there on the porch facing right where Michael would have been standing in front of the tree. He then goes for a smoke, obviously knowing that Michael was standing there, and then he just gives up and accepts his death? You can make the argument that it's dark outside, but surely he'd at least catch a glimpse of Michael through the dimly lit porch light. Or are we to believe that the White Horse has given Michael slasher teleportation too? Ugh. Jesus Christ. But in any case, with Annie all alone and Michael Myers inside her house, I think we all know where this is headed. And to give praise where it's due, Annie's death scene is incredibly chilling, with a lot of suspenseful direction, ambient sound design, without excessive noise, all topped off with the muted sounds of Annie's screams, and Michael killing her off screen, leaving it up to the viewer's imagination as to what torturous acts Michael was performing on her. And the proverbial cherry on top of this whole scene is Brad Dourif's reaction when he finds out.
Oh no, Annie!
I don't know how to feel about this scene. On the one hand, the delivery is a little bit off-kilter, but my god, you can hear all of that pain ringing throughout his voice, which completely sells the idea of not only a father losing their child, but in turn the absolute horror of seeing your daughter mutilated for a second time by the very same monster who attacked her before. Except now, there was absolutely no saving her. Adding on to that injury with the movie flashing back to clips of Annie as a child while a beautifully somber piece of music plays in the background. So, all in all, I guess I don't really have anything else to say other than... Oh Nani? But for as brief of a reprieve as that moment might have been, we now come to our climax, where Laurie is on the run from Michael before being captured by her older brother and taken back to the shack where he's made his humble abode for the final confrontation. The police eventually showing up ready to take Michael down, with Loomis showing up in tow.
Sheriff!
Anyway, Loomis, being the idiot savant, runs in willy-nilly to try and draw Michael out of the shack as the ritual begins to reach its completion, with Loomis being the final sacrifice needed to complete it. And after getting a Jason Goes to Hell style execution where Michael dies for realsies this time, Laurie then wanders outside, now possessed by the White Horse or some shit, picking up Michael's knife, which causes the police to gun her down. Why? I don't know. Then some jury music starts playing as Brad Dourif rushes over to her corpse, and then we cut to this weird purgatory realm where Laurie sees a white horse and smiles creepily. And on that bizarre note, that was Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, a movie that's, whoa. This is a really weird movie, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure where I'd rank it in terms of the other Halloween movies, or really where I'd put it in general. The film has a lot of pacing issues, incompetent plotting, and at times aggravating character moments that may irritate people less forgiving than I, but likewise, the movie, unlike any other Halloween sequel, does experiment with a lot of interesting ideas regarding Michael Myers and Laurie Strode, and presents them with very mixed success. The lowest of lows, without a doubt, are a sticking point and definitely a negative for the movie, but for what it gets right, it takes those highs and manages to pull them off very succinctly. While I'd hesitate to recommend Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 to both fans and newcomers, I will say that Halloween 2 is at least interesting. And I'd easily take an interesting Halloween sequel over yet another repetitive sequel that sets everything back to square one and tries in vain to recapture the fading brand appeal of Michael Myers. Wow, this looks like a nice shady spot on a hot summer's day. But I suppose when it's all said and done, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, like a bucket of candy, is a mixed bag. You'll find some goodies hidden here and there, but you might also bite into some tooth-rotting stuff. And if any other horror movies you plan on watching tonight are droll and uninspired, then I'd say you could certainly do worse than Halloween 2 in terms of recommendations. So on that note, I'm Solidus-Skully, keep it new metal, and next time on Skully Reviews, we're going to be taking a look at Ratchet & Clank 2 Locked and Loaded. And I wish you all a very happy Halloween, eat lots of candy, get drunk, party on dudes, and I will catch you next time.
Oh man, it was a dream.
You've been hit by, you've been struck by a smooth criminal.
I cannot see fucking shit in these glasses.
Michael Myers is fucking dead!
Risotto, molto bene, Dan Homer.